We're back. Welcome back to part 2 of my video. Obviously, using this free version of Screencast-O-Matic is giving me a bit of trouble because I clearly talk for longer than 15 minutes at a time, but we all knew that. Anyway, we were at the point where we were practicing identifying representations in different texts. And so I'd given you these 2 texts and we were looking at whether or not they were positive or negative representations of the issue. So the first thing we need to do is kind of question what type of text it is, who is the author, and what is the purpose. So you can see in text 1 that this is what we would call a political cartoon. So it's political cartoons often make statements about different social issues. The author is the cartoonist, who you can see their name in the bottom there. Sorry, I don't actually know the author's name. But the purpose of this text 1, would be obviously to make a statement about Indigenous fathers and how irresponsible they are. Text 2 is a tweet. Okay, so it's a media text that was put out by the Aboriginal Health Organisation, and it is a picture of Jonathan Thurston and his daughter, and the purpose of this one is to show that Indigenous dads are role models and can be good fathers. So, who is the target audience for text 1? I would say the target audience would probably be people that have strong opinions on political issues and, may have cultural assumptions about Indigenous families and Indigenous fathers not being responsible for their children. Target audience might be people that read newspapers too, because you often find political cartoons in a newspaper. The target audience for text 2 is quite different. It would be Indigenous people. Okay, it's a Indigenous health organisation. They are trying to target other Indigenous dads, I believe, and they're showing how Jonathan Thurston is a role model here. So what is the issue? Both of them are actually about the same issue. They're about the issue of Indigenous fathers and whether or not Indigenous fathers are actually responsible and caring towards their children. So who is being represented? Indigenous men, okay? And how are they being represented? Well, quite differently. If you can see in text 1, the Indigenous father there is positioned to look very stereotypical. He's slouched, he has no shoes on, he's got a can of alcohol, and he's drawn in a stereotypical way to emphasize, lips, nose, hair, his skin features that make him stereotypically Aboriginal. Okay, and then you've got Jonathan Thurston, who is being represented in this text, and you can see that he is positioned there to look loving and caring. He's not looking at the camera, he's looking at his own daughter with a smile on his face, and he's embracing her in a loving way. Whereas that contrasts with text 1, where the father is standing away from his son and looking down at the child as if to say, "Who are you?" How we're positioned to feel in text 1, we're positioned to, kind of feel, not empathetic towards the Indigenous father. We're supposed to feel like, well, that's pretty typical of Indigenous men, just not looking after their children properly. How we're positioned to feel in text 2? Obviously, we're positioned to feel that Jonathan Thurston is a champion and a good role model. So we've got the hashtag there, Indigenous dads. So what are all the clues that are teaching us about these representations? Well, we're looking at language features. So language features in the first one, we have a little bit of text from the policeman, text or dialogue from the policeman and then from the father. The policeman is talking about personal responsibility. And I guess that is the irony there, that the Indigenous dad has taken no responsibility for the child, because he says, yeah, righto, what's his name then? And he's using like kind of slang language, yeah, righto. So colloquialisms to make him sound, I guess, less knowledgeable. And then so language in text too. A champion off the field, on and off the field as a role model father, hashtag Indigenous dad. So you can see that inspirational language, champion, role model, making us feel good about Jonathan Thurston as a father and a footballer. So the images, we sort of talked about the stereotypical cartoon drawn here. Is there any symbols in text one? Yes, you can see that there's a symbol of a VB can to symbolise that Aboriginals are alcoholics. And you can also see the baton there that the policeman is wielding, which I guess is supposed to symbolise the police brutality that sometimes Indigenous people can suffer. Interestingly, the policeman himself looks as if he might be Indigenous, which might have been different if the cartoonist had drawn him as a white man. The images in the tweet, text 2, you can see that it is just an extreme close-up of Thurston and his daughter, and the doll that the girl is holding. Now, the doll itself was quite controversial and made the media that she had a black doll rather than another coloured doll. So again, that is, I suppose, another issue, but we'll just focus on the one about the Indigenous dads. You can see that she's holding the medal there, that she's looking into his eyes. The position of the two of them is very close and loving. And the text structure, well, on text 1, there isn't that much information about who the author is and what the purpose is and where this comes from. And text 2, you can see that they've got the logo there for the Aboriginal Health organisation, and that you've got the person that has tweeted this. And there's a hashtag there, I guess, where you could find out more information or see other images of Indigenous dads. So there's a bit more information in text 2. So I think we can already probably guess, but if you, which one is the negative and which one is the positive representation, you can see that this one is definitely a negative stereotypical representation of Indigenous dads, and Jonathan Thurston is the positive representation of Indigenous dads. Okay, so I have written an evaluation paragraph which gives an example of how you might write one yourself to talk about these two texts. So I'll just read that through with you. So the issue of Indigenous dads has been represented in two different ways in the two texts examined. Text 1 is a political cartoon designed to comment on how Indigenous dads do not make good fathers and don't take responsibility for their children. This is a negative representation of Indigenous fathers as it relies on an insulting, stereotyped image of an Aboriginal man drinking beer and a young Aboriginal boy being in trouble with the police. This cartoon continues to reinforce negative cultural assumptions about Aboriginal fathers, that Aboriginal fathers are drunks who abandon their children. In contrast, the second text, a tweet by the National Aboriginal Health Organisation, depicts Jonathan Thurston embracing his daughter at the Rugby League Grand Final in 2015. This is a positive representation of Indigenous dads, as it uses the inspirational image of Thurston, demonstrating that he is a caring and responsible father. Language used, such as in the text such as champion and role model, is used to challenge the stereotype of Indigenous dads being deadbeats. So you'll note there that I've used some of the language that I talked about in the vocabulary section of this lesson, and I was clearly able to identify some of the language features and text structures and some of the visual clues that helped us evaluate whether or not that representation was positive or negative. Okay, that's all from me. See you next time.